popcorn reading is like its own special form of cruelty in my humble opinion. I think it's horrible. Welcome back to the Caffeinated Classroom. My name is Marie and I'm a high school English teacher in San Diego, California. And welcome to my Caffeinated Classroom. This is another episode of my weekly teacher tip happy hour every Thursday, bringing you 3 actionable tips that can actually help you organize things or get things going a little bit better in your classroom, teaching tips, that sort of thing. So this week we're talking about something that I've been actually talking about a lot on Instagram lately, and it is about how to get students to actually read. So mind you, I am a high school English teacher, right? So my bread and butter is students reading, writing, and then talking about what they wrote and what they read. So getting students to actually read the text that I'm assigning is pretty essential. So I have found 3 tips that are really helping with just getting students to actually do the work, and so that then when we go to write something or we go to discuss, they actually have something that they think, they have something to work with because they are familiar with the text, and not just familiar with the text, but they've already begun to analyze whatever text it is that we're talking about. Step 1 is to get them to read. So my first tip is to build interest or buy-in somehow. I mean, this one is pretty obvious. This is for any material at all that students are going to read, but this might mean, and for me it has meant, going back and refiguring out what I'm going to be using for text in my classroom. There are some things that like I personally love, but I already went through high school. Like this isn't about me anymore. So some of those texts that I just adore, I'm glad that I had that great experience with them, but my students are not connecting with them in a way that I did and that I currently do. And this is more about them than it is me. So building student interest means finding texts that are relevant to them. And this is challenging in a bunch of ways. It's challenging because it means going against like what is considered classic texts and things that kids should read and should know about. Is that really even a thing? I don't think it is. So finding texts that are relevant to students' lives, that they can actually connect with, that they feel some sort of a pull to, that are like interesting to them, that's one thing. Finding texts around that nature, whether it's poetry or short stories or articles that are relevant to their lives, or novels, if you're gonna do a class novel and that sort of thing, or even book clubs, finding things that are actually interesting to students will get them to read a heck of a lot easier than like something that they can't connect with because they just aren't getting it, no matter how hard we try to make some of those classics that we love interesting. Kids just aren't always gonna like them. And I'm not saying that kids have to like everything you give them in order to learn something from it, but getting them to buy into what it is that you're selling, or getting them interested in the text in the first place, is a huge step forward in getting students to actually read. So there's one tip. The second half of this is student buy-in, attaching grades to things. I didn't used to subscribe to this idea. I didn't used to give student reading quizzes along the way. Well, I've gone back and forth over the years. I've oscillated between giving chapter quizzes every chapter, every couple of chapters, if we're reading a class novel, for instance, or just letting it go completely and just kind of gleaning from class discussion and what students are writing that they've read or haven't read. Right now in my 12th year of teaching, and I'm back in the high school English classroom, I am definitely quizzing students on their reading for a few different reasons. Basically, it's because how else am I going to know that they are understanding what they've read? Not just that they've read it, but that their reading comprehension. We have so many different levels in our classes of reading lexiles, and being able to, obviously you're not gonna have one text that everybody gets on an equal playing field necessarily, but there are some tools out there that I've been using, like commonlit.org is a great free online service that has guided reading questions along with each of their readings, and they have both fiction and nonfiction texts. And so I've started creating more quizzes that aren't like, ooh, gotcha, you didn't read because you didn't know that, but it's more to gauge understanding of the text, so that I can help students along who need the help, and I can open up some discussions for students who don't necessarily need that kind of support, but it kind of gets us all on one even field, and I know that everybody at least got this part of like whatever the reading was. And then also attaching a grade to it is just, students are students. They're going to need that kind of a motivation sometimes, some more often than, you know, than others, but there you go. Okay, my second tip for getting students to actually read the text that you assign is to give them choice. Whether it's the whole class votes, and then yeah, you're gonna have some drop off of that motivation of choice if it was like voted on something that a certain student didn't choose. But like this year, I tried this out as a total experiment, and like, I cannot believe how well that it worked. I put my students into groups for book clubs based on genre. So like, no, it was very rare that multiple students were reading the same book in any one of my classes. We did like a whole book tasting on one of the first days of school, but it wasn't a book tasting, it was a genre tasting. And I had around my class, and if you don't know what that is, I'll link down below to some like really great blog posts on book tastings. So I took this idea of a book tasting where students get to just like get a little taste of a book and kind of introduce themselves to it and decide whether or not they want to read whatever the book is that they're tasting. And I made it into genres. And so they got to sample a few different books from, I think I had like 10 different genres set up around my room, and students got to taste these genres and kind of get a feel for what they were in the mood for right then and there. You know, August, it was the beginning of this school year. And then they put down their preference of what genre they would like to read, and I grouped them based on their genres into small little book club groups. But it was very cool. I would say I had probably close to 80% of my students actually do most of the reading of their novel. And then we did some cool discussions within their groups, and they actually had to do a little bit of analysis on like a short little thing for me for the final like part of that, bringing it all together. Student choice is huge, especially when it comes to reading. Reading takes so much focus, and it takes so much brain power, and it takes so much like, it's having to set time aside to actually just read. You cannot read and do other things at the same time. It is the anti-multitasking task, right? Where, that was a lot to say. So I want to make sure that I'm going to set them up for success, that it's something they're interested in, something that is like level appropriate. And often they're going to choose something if they get that like free choice that is going to kind of fulfill those little elements. But you don't have to make choice like totally open, as you know. You could say, okay, to pair with To Kill a Mockingbird that we're all going to be reading as a class, you can also read like this book or this book or this, you know, like 3 or 4 options, and then put them into book clubs or something like that, just to give that element of choice. I think it greatly encourages students to read, because it's more, it puts more of the responsibility on them to set their own parameters and make themselves go, because they chose this, like they made their bed, now they have to read it. Okay, you know what I mean. My third tip is to give them the opportunity to read. Often that's gonna mean in the classroom, and I cannot tell you, I mean, this is my own personal preference, but like I remember sitting in my high school English classrooms and we would do popcorn reading, and I was like, end me. I can't take it. I don't read at the same speed as other people, and I just felt so bad for students who had a hard time cold reading something, especially in front of the whole entire class. Popcorn reading is like its own special form of cruelty in my humble opinion. I think it's horrible. But that doesn't mean that you don't read a text in class, and it doesn't mean that the teacher has to do a whole read aloud. It's 2018, it's almost 2019 here, people. Audiobooks are the wave of the future. Our district has an amazing resource called Overdrive. It's the Overdrive app, and like I think most of our school libraries have a subscription to Overdrive. Like, talk to your librarian and see if your district or your school has this opportunity, because we just read through the Holocaust Memoir Night, my 10th grade classes. It took us 4 class periods to get through the whole entire book, and we took breaks because it's so heavy, because it's a Holocaust memoir. But we did it along to an audiobook. And there are some passages of the book where I would have it go at normal speed, and then some passages where I noticed that my students were fine and they were keeping up just fine, even though the audiobook was a different translation and it wasn't exactly the same English like idioms and that sort of thing as were written in our physical text. and I would turn up the speed by like a quarter time, and they did great. And I actually said to all 3 of my classes, like, I know that there is a higher percentage of you than there probably should be for whom this will be the very first book that you read cover to cover in high school, maybe even middle school. I'm like, 60% of my class is like nodding, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so many more than I thought it was gonna be. But you guys, it was great. Like, they did it. And the only reason that they would need to read this book outside of class is because they missed class, or they fell asleep, or like they got called out, or whatever it is. And you know, we're helping each other like wake up, and we're taking breaks, and we're stretching our legs and doing that sort of thing. But it was also a very good community building like experience, because they all were, it was almost like watching a live performance. They all got to see and hear the exact same thing at the exact same time and experience it together. It's a really cool, the conversations we've been having after having experienced that story all at the same time are much deeper than any of my former classes in years past. And there's something to be said about the opportunity to experience a text all together as one, and not rely on their own individual understanding, but to get that audio and the visual, and to have the backup of me there to pause it and say, are you understanding what's going on? Like, I realize this one word has been repeated a bunch of times. Are we all getting that that is very, very highly weighted? Obviously, Night is an example that I am using, but it's like barely over 100 pages. It's a very, very short text. So something like Grapes of Wrath, you're not gonna be able to read Grapes of Wrath to the audiobook. You'll take your entire semester. Like, you'll take a whole grading period worth of class time to get through that. So maybe just choose the like passages that you think are that important, or that are like those like big key pieces of whatever the text is, to have students be able to like do the audiobook, or to be able to read in class, or to watch the movie, or like that sort of a thing. You just want to make sure that you are ensuring understanding, and that they are able to keep up, because students who don't understand or who have missed a little bit are going to give up more easily. Yeah, that opportunity in class, and making sure that you're not moving the train along too fast, even if they're having to read outside of class. Give them ample time. They have jobs, they have siblings, they have parents, they have friends and social lives, and this is not their only class. Yours is not their only class. They have homework for other classes. They have sports, they have other things that they're doing, and they need to rest. Their little brains need to like process information. They cannot just keep inputting. It has to process. You have to give them that time. This is a little bit longer of a teacher tip happy hour than normal. So with that, I'm going to bid you adieu. Please, please, if you've not already subscribed to this channel, take a moment to click the little red subscribe button. Make sure you click the bell so that you get alerts and you don't miss out on any of these wonderful video gems like the one I have just created for you. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you next time. Bye.